Hi, my name is Dani Zoorob. I'm the chair for the Department of OBGYN at LSU in Shreveport, Louisiana. Thank you very much for having me here, Mr. Bauer.
Hi, Danny. Oh, no, you don't need to call me Mr. Power. This is a space among friends. So welcome to the
All right,
podcast.
Scott,
I'm
it is.
yes, I
So
know.
please call me Danny.
I will. So good to see you, Danny. I'm very happy to have this opportunity to speak with you about your story and all the incredible accomplishments you have had in your illustrious career. And I think it's really exciting to be able to learn from like your experiences within education. But I also know that the medical field is also a big part of your background. And I'm curious to hear how those things intersect. Like, what brought you to the work that you do? And then what are some of those intersections, given the fact that both of us are currently halfway through a master's in education leadership, hence the t-shirt. For listeners who can't see, I'm wearing our our t-shirt. Yes, it's exciting. So yeah, to kind of start us off, I'd love to hear just this kind of overview of like various different milestones that you've had in your career. But it's not just about the professional experiences, but also the various personal connections and positive influences that you've had along the way. You can kind of take us through some points of your journey up until now. That would be really interesting.
First of all, thank you very much for hosting me on your show. And I really think the idea of hosting colleagues and talking about them and focusing on global citizenship is a critical topic. So I really appreciate you delving into this and engaging everybody in the cohort for that. I really appreciate that. When it comes to my journey, I don't know how fun it is, but probably one of the earliest things I can remember, and probably my journey focuses on gratitude, honestly. I've had a lot of positive influence in my life from people around me who have supported me to be where I am. Um, One of the earliest memories I have of someone supporting me and helping me guide me through the uh, track to education, honestly, were my mother and my aunt. Those are two of the most influential people in my life. Both my mother and my aunt were midwives. Um, my aunt was probably the first person in her family who actually went to college. And she went to the United Kingdom on a scholarship where she became a midwife. And she would, just like you watched in the shows, she would bike to work. So, I mean, she was like, the show called The Midwife? That's exactly what she was. She did that in the United Kingdom. And then she went to yeah, Australia, where she worked as well. So a lot of the conversations we had at home had to do with medicine and how to teach and educate and engage students and learners. And that played a big role for me. So I would learn a lot from my mom and my aunt. And as weird as it sounds, there would be lunch or dinner conversations, and that's all the talk would be. So ever since I was young, it was part of the way I was nurtured, going to school and then to college. And probably one of the biggest influences, again, I will go back to my aunt, and I cannot stop but to say I can never be grateful enough because she's the one who pushed me to go to college. I remember that phone call at 7 a.m. where she was screaming over the phone, "Where is Danny?" And my mom was like, "Well, he's home." She's like, "College is starting today. Why isn't he there?" And I remember very, very, very well. And she said, "Why is he not going?" And she said, "Because it costs a lot." And my aunt is the one who paid for my college for my undergrad. She treated me like one of her own. She did not have kids. I will never forget that day when she called, because that was probably the biggest pivot I've had in my life of going into a professional career. And I remember when I graduated from medical school, and I still have that gift, she gave me her graduation gift, what she got when she graduated from midwifery school. It was her kit, the delivery kit that she had, and so on. So that was my graduation gift when I graduated medical school 7 years later. So when you think of gratitude to people who have made a very big impression in your life, that is very, very big. Um, Another person for me who made a very big impression in my life is my brother-in-law. My father passed away when I was very, very, very young, and he raised me as his own. So I grew up on an island. It's called Cyprus. It's in the Mediterranean. It looks very much like Hawaii and so on. So it was from that standpoint, it was great. And he treated me like his own. He had a daughter, and then later on he had a son. But I always was like one of his kids. For gratitude, those are the people I'm very, very, very grateful to. For who put me on my journey to education, it was the same people. Um, I completed medical school and did my residency in OBGYN, my training. And I did 1 year of something very similar to Doctors Without Borders, where we drove a minivan for a full year. It was myself and two of my colleagues. One was a specialist in pulmonology, and the other was in pediatrics. And literally for a year, we drove the minivan. And we took care of patients, like people we never met, never. We didn't know who they were, and we would like go from, on the weekends from one city to the other, and so on. It was just a lot of fun, I have to say. And then I elected. I I I moved to the U.S. in 2007. That is another very, 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 very um, course-changing part in my life, which I'm very grateful for. And I repeated my training. I went to University of Cincinnati, and then I did my fellowship in urogynecology. I've always had a passion for working with women, specifically older women. There's not a lot of people who focus on older women. Um, my if you recall, my mom and my aunt, and they were always older than me. So for me, that was kind of like I've always been interested in figuring out how to support older women. I'm a very big women's rights advocate, and actually, my tie is I'm going to tie in my tie to the discussion. Uh,
Hey,
um,
always
it's
appreciate a
got
good pun.
flowers on it. It's one of the reasons why I'm wearing this tie specifically is first of all, Happy Mother's Day. It's going to be coming up soon. But it's also an appreciation for all the unspoken efforts of women in the field of OBGYN who have never been appreciated for what they've done. Um, I moved to after I finished fellowship, I moved to Kansas City, where I worked at University of Kansas Medical Center, where I was very, very involved with medical student education. That ignited my interest in teaching, and I started doing research with medical students. And then I was recruited to Ohio, to Toledo, to work with a great chairman. And he and his wife helped me engage medical students even more. So, and he was probably one of the biggest supporters from a mentorship standpoint, and guiding my way and holding my hand of how to grow. And it was with his support that I ended up in this position right now, although he lost me from his department, but he was my biggest proponent in getting me here where I am right now. So that is part of my journey. Why am I doing the master's in education and higher education specifically? It's because ultimately I'd love to be more involved in the medical school curriculum setup. Um, I think I think we need to I think there's always place for innovation and for growth and for updating our curricula in alignment with what our current generation needs. And currently, I engage the medical students at our institution at least twice a week through trainings, through PBLs, through practice-based, problem-based learning, and case-based learning as well. Actually, before this Zoom meeting, I was sending emails about, okay, when are we meeting this week and what time, you know? So yeah, so I'm very excited about being at Harvard doing a master's in education. To many, it's a dream. Um, when I look at who's with me in our cohort, it is so awesome. I have never had the opportunity of being with such a nice group of people from every walk of life, practically. Um, I hope I'm not blabbering too much, by the way. If I am, just tell me, please. It just like I remember the first day when we all met, I'm like, oh my gosh. Sometimes you walk into a room and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm like nothing in front of all of these people. So it was just like it was awesome. It was awesome meeting a lot of people. And yeah, and we're halfway through practically. So woohoo.
Woohoo. No, well, thank you so much, Denny, for sharing all of that. Beautifully said. And it's just that this through line of gratitude as you started and then also ended this journey of your life has just been really yeah, just heartwarming and very refreshing in the sense that I think we always have to be refreshed with why like who got us to this point. I think one of our professors, or at least kind of the co-chairs within the program, Dr. Irvin Scott, shout out to Dr. Scott, also for having a great name, Scott. Um, but he often talks
I'm just
about,
joking.
yeah, like to always remember those who like brought you over the bridge, right? So that kind of like connecting point, and to not forget that we're always connected to them, and that's why when you talked about the work that you're doing with really supporting college, not college, sorry, I think it's more so like your passion for working with like older women, like that being your focus within the medical field, in memory of these maternal figures of yours, I think is just so amazing. And I wanted to point this out, at least from my own backstory, is that my mom is an ICU nurse, so medical
Ah,
field. There's this connection, uh,
all right.
and and yeah, and I feel like and I've thought about this myself, and maybe I'd like to hear your thoughts on this too. But the work of those within the medical field, and then also those within like specifically education, as we often think of in the traditional sense of like school teacher, let's say. But they both are incredibly like compassionate, uh, vocations, right? Where people really have to look at the other and observe and care for and support, a group of individuals or just one patient or one particular student. And there's a certain capacity that is required of us to be able to give that. It's a very giving profession for both. Would you agree?
I 100% agree. So, in my opinion, teachers, whether it's school teachers, college teachers, and teachers at medical schools, at the educators, they're unspoken heroes. We talk about, when COVID hit, we talked about all these heroes and so on, but there are heroes that are behind the scenes that have been doing this for many years, which nobody talks about. And all the struggles that they go through with all the students, whether as from being very young to being older. Um, two of my two of my sisters-in-law are school teachers. One works with students with special needs, and the other is high school teacher. And I know the struggles they go through. We talk about that stuff. It's very similar to the struggles that educators in medical schools go through. It's a lot of struggles from a standpoint of how to engage, how to do this. But day by day, and I notice they wake up and they love it. They go, they teach, they engage, despite all the resistance they get, and all the changes that have happened throughout the years of how even with the PTAs and how the meetings with the school teachers happen and so on. And currently we have that similarly in medical school, but it is a very giving career from a standpoint of what they do. Whenever you're an educator, you are engaging, you're giving part of yourself to make others better. That's what it is. You're always doing that. And despite the fact that there's lots of struggles, because not every student's going to be the same as the other, not everybody's going to grasp it the same way. You're going to have to put a lot of effort to help some, whereas some of them, so the others are like, oh, they got it without. I personally believe that there is a lot of agree with you 100% from a standpoint of this is a very giving field when it comes to education. Higher education is a little different. The struggle is a little different. The expectations are a little different. But at the end of the day, if you are not someone who's there to give part of yourself to the others, you're not going to be in this field. It's the same thing. Your mom's an ICU nurse. She works in the ICU, works with patients. She's giving part of herself, part of her time to help others improve. And what we don't realize is all those med students and all those PA students and all those learners are probably rotating with her on ICU. They have to, that's part of their training. And nursing staff behind the scenes engages the students as much as the physicians do when they teach them. There's so much you can learn from working with the nursing staff, working with how they do and so on, and what they show them and demonstrate their compassion for working with patients. So I think, you know, your mom is an educator without you realizing it. She is part of the team. So I commend, tell your mom I say hello and thank you.
Oh, she's
Uh,
listening. She's my number
although I
one
don't know her,
follower.
but no, I agree with you 100%. Education is 100% giving, and giving part of yourself for the improvement of others.
Danny, thank you so much for saying that. And the way you said it was so articulate and beautiful. You know, I talk with my mom about some of the struggles that I have as a teacher, and then you know, and she definitely talks about some of the situations that happen in the hospital, and I'm like just beyond words of like, wow, that happened, or that patient is going through that. But it's hard, I think, for my mom, especially, to really think of herself as an educator because of all of these kind of like preconceived notions that our society holds on to about what really qualifies as a learning environment, right? The classroom particularly. So my mom is actually an immigrant from South Korea, and she has said at different points that because she grew up in rural poverty, she never quite learned Korean very well because she immigrated when she was 16, and then trying to learn English and then go to college, it was such a struggle, and she never really quite learned, you know, English in a proper way. It just kind of was like just desperate, just trying to get there. So there's this sense of like, you know, there's various kind of formalities, like the appearance of like how we express ourselves. Maybe it's the curriculum, instructional design. There's all these things that come with like education as like the kind of like toolkit. But then what you're saying is that actually it's really the heart, right? It's the actions of like you showing up and you guiding people and you know really rallying around a patient to be their biggest advocate, because especially in the ICU and then in many other areas of the hospital, it is life or death, like in that moment. Within the classroom, the life or death, I mean, we're talking on a much larger scale when it comes to like how they use what they've learned to live a meaningful life. But there's different sense of urgency, would you say, when it comes to like how you address a patient and how you address your, you know, grad student in medical school?
Well, we're one of the biggest things is we're dealing with different age groups. That's one of the things. At school, you know, you're kind of like spoon feeding, and it's yes, it is a lower stakes, quote unquote, but in my opinion, it's still a high stake from a standpoint of if you don't educate the young learners well from when they are young, they won't be able to achieve that ability to ultimately be in college, to excel down the line. So I personally do believe that although it's a different learning environment and the environments change, you know, like I love being at Starbucks and studying at Starbucks. You know, for me, that works if I'm trying to learn something. Others, you know, they won't like it, for example. I think every person learns in a different environment, but the environment itself doesn't define where you can learn. You can learn from a lot. You can learn from just observing, you know, and I mean, we learn this, you know, quote unquote, we're learning it right now about the different approaches to education, the different ways to engage, different ways to lead and show people how to, you know, how to excel. Um, it is a very different environment. It's very different stakes, but at the end of the day, we are all educators, whether we like it or not, whether we realize it or not, and we very often overlook where a lot of the education comes from. Um, you know, I keep going back to the medical field because that's where I'm engaged a lot in. But I see around me when the nurses teach each other, when they engage the students, when they engage the doctors, and so on. And yes, they engage the doctors, and that's probably one of the biggest things is that we always very often, and I realize this is being recorded, and I'm fine with that 100%. We don't realize how much there is interaction between nursing and physicians, and the fact that the two of them teach each other. I think it's very wrong to consider that the doctor is teaching the nurse. No, she or he, by the way. And that's another thing that many people realize, that nurses are only women. No, nurses are men and women, and the same thing with physicians. And that is something I'm now going on a tangent where there's a long-standing history of, if you see a guy, it's automatically a doctor. If you see a lady, it's automatically a nurse. No, that's a very, very, very wrong notion. Men and women equally are in nursing and as physicians, and they equally teach each other and work with each other and cooperate, and learn from one another. I've learned a lot from the nurses who I've worked with before. There are things that happen behind the scenes, which as doctors we're never taught. And the only opportunity for us to learn it is to ask, engage, and be part of a team. And that's probably one of the biggest things that I work with where I am now, is working on multidisciplinary teams. And we have nursing staff who come from other countries, and engaging how their education was, how their thought process is, how they approach things, can also help us learn and engage things in a different way. So yeah, I think it's critical to be open, critical to be appreciative of what others bring to the table, because you learn and you teach at the same time. For example, on labor and delivery, we have a lot of medical students, and we have a lot of students who are from different specialties, such as PA students and so on. They're all learning. We teach them. And I love it when a med student shows up with an article or something where, hey, this is new, and we discuss it and I learn from it. And I think that's probably the biggest thing is, yes, you might be their quote unquote, their professor, but you need to be open to learning, you know. Information, education, and it's ever evolving. So we can't just stagnate and be like, I'm the professor, I'm not gonna, I love it when the med student challenges their professor, or the student challenges, not in a very respectful and very engaging and in a very, articulate manner, from a standpoint of engaging. Maybe I should use the word engage rather than challenge. But to the physician, to the person, you're challenging the skill set, because, oh, I need to learn more, I need to acquire more, and so on. I love that interaction between the two. Yeah.
Yeah, that was great. And there's so much to unpack from from what you just said. I mean, one of them just being how like the profession of just doctors, right? The relationship between like physicians and nurses, like it speaks to this shifting professional landscape, right? Where the education required, and then the doors that are available now being opened for like women to become doctors, and then now men to become nurses, and to understand that the quality of treatment, everything is just as good, if not better, right? Of course, given different contexts and who we're talking about, right? But I think it's important to recognize that, and then the interactions, the engagement, as you put it, to be open-minded, right, to new articles about new informations, the innovation that comes with that, but also like the feedback that may be required to actually advance is so important. And then the collaborative spirit to learn from those around you, regardless of titles, but to engage in that respectful way, I think is so beautiful, and very much akin to what I strive for within a classroom environment myself. So these are some strong connections that we're building. And I think when at least when I think about moments of like growth, they can sometimes be difficult, right? A little bit intimidating or even painful, really. But I think of them as like prime points, right? Kind of like a specific moment where, yeah, you were challenged, you were faced with something, and you had this breakthrough, maybe with the support of those around you or that mentor figure. So, I know that you're in a position where you are supporting students to have their own breakthroughs and to advance and in their profession and their studies. But if you can like reflect about your own kind of like prime points, there could be many, but is there any one that comes to mind in particular, Or I know that you mentioned the like driving the minivan. That sounded like a really cool. I'm sure like within that 1 year, there must have been some prime point that happened. Is there any kind of story, anecdote that you'd like to mention from that period, or it could be from another period as well? But again, prime points can come in all different shapes and forms.
Um, so if I go back to the when when we were driving the minivan, it was a fun experience. I think people should attempt to engage in doing charity work, free work, and engaging patients who have. We worked with people who had never had seen a doctor in their life. Probably to me that made a big difference, and that finally somebody. I mean, there would be women who had never seen an OBGYN in their life. They're like in their late 50s or early 50s, and they've had their babies and that's it, but there's so much more that they don't know about. But for me, probably some of the aha moments or the wake up moments have been a few things that have happened through Hugsy recently, and I think, and actually I mentioned it last week in one of the sessions with Dr. Honan. I mean, it was so I so we just finished finance, and I've done two finance courses before, and I was like, going through the course, and I'm like, oh my gosh, now I know what this means. It's like now I know what this means. You actually link it. And that's where I think education is critical and how engaging the students or the learners is critical. I'm an adult learner who's gone through the same course twice in different training settings, not through the same institution, and two completely different educators who taught finance. And here comes a third who actually makes sense, who actually connects the dots and makes you understand the material. And I think that's where it is critical to educate the educators about how to engage the students and actually connect with them. So for me, that big aha moment was attending that course, seeing how he engaged everybody, how he linked the information. You're sometimes taught the information, you're given the book, you're given the chapter, read this, we're going to talk about this, and this is your exam. But okay, what is the use of this? It's like information in, information out. Sorry, but it's like more like garbage in, garbage out. Whereas what Dr. Holden did, for example, was, yeah, there's a lot of information. Everybody, I remember starting the course, everybody's freaking out, but he made it so lively, engaging, understandable, step by step, and it's a very tough course. I'm not going to say it's easy, but at the same time, he made those connections. And I think that's where probably one of the biggest things, and for me, that's critical and why I'm doing this degree, is I need to learn how to make those connections, to connect with my learners. If I don't, I'm going to be useless as an educator. So that aha moment was to learn from Dr. Honan, to learn more about focusing on the connection, building the connection, how to engage. That was an aha moment for me when finance finally made sense, uh, which is bad to say, but it's true.
Well, it was
Of
a
course, the course itself.
oh my gosh. Yeah, so intimidating. And yet I think this point about connection, no, not connection, connecting the dots and really engaging learners is so important. Because like there was this sense that like we often hear, right, teachers are like great teachers are also like great cheerleaders, right? So there's this element of like you can do it that is prevalent. I think in the case of like Jim's class, where he would say something, and this was I think mentioned in our class, right? Where someone would say a very basic line about finance, and he's like, "Brilliant, that's a brilliant comment." And sometimes you'd be like, "Oh, I don't know if that necessarily matched the kind of level of like, oh, saying this in front of a bunch of Harvard students and then that qualifies as brilliance. But I think there's this like he's like egging you on, right? Saying like, tell me more. Like that's where you're at. And now let's push it further. I know you can do more and you're doing great. Like I think there's this element of praise in addition to how the actual course is structured and like engaging with like various different kind of, note catchers and like the kind of like collaborative slides that everyone's just kind of like working in different teams. And it was 92 students in our cohort, and he was able to get us on the edge of our seats about something like nonprofit finances. Like, who would have thought?
Well, I think, this speaks to a lot of how education has evolved over the years. I mean, when COVID hit, a lot of institutions transitioned to online. And, not every educator made it from a standpoint of some people gave up, some people excelled online, some people stagnated in a sense. And I personally think that COVID pushed education way forward. Some people think backwards. No, no, no. I think it pushed it forward because we had to adapt, we had to evolve. And if you look at our course, for example, it was so engaging, it was so involving, it was, and I think that's where probably one of the biggest things is for me from learning this is, okay, how do I learn how to teach other colleagues how to engage the students better? I think for me, that's probably the biggest thing is how to help others, how to help colleagues become better online, become better with students, become better in engaging. For example, medical school curricula in the past, where you walk into a course, you attend the course, the one doctor is sitting in this big hall and blah, 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 blah. They're talking and they're like, okay, you have exam at the end of the week. You have to read these 1,000 pages. Okay. And I'm just throwing it out as a number. Sorry, it's not 1,000, but close. And then that's it. That was the old system. The current system, and over time we figured this out, is, you know, unless you have active learning, unless you engage the student, unless the person gets triggered to look for the information and start building that connections, those neurons start firing and making that connection, you're never going to learn appropriately, and you're never going to be able to apply it as well, retain it as well, and so on. So I think education, we're evolving that education, but the educators need to learn that too. The students need to learn it. It's like everybody is evolving and learning and growing. And I think for me, that's why this program that we're in, the Hugsy, it is that pathway for me to try to help my institution to move forward as I collaborate with our Associate Dean of Medical Education and with other colleagues who have gone through med ed master's in education degrees. I actually have faculty in my department who one of them has a PhD in education, so that we can help improve our institution, help our learners, help our system excel.
Wow, that's inspiring, because I wholeheartedly believe that you will change medical school, how it's taught. This is an opportunity. I know you're grimacing a little bit, but believe in yourself, because
I hope I can make a small difference. I hope I can make a small difference. I
you're,
really do.
you're far too modest. But I think that the kind of model that you're able to create within your institution will be so important for other medical schools to take note and to ask that question, right? To engage in that reflection of like have we moved into this new era of really engaging learners to become the best physicians possible? Because I'll be honest, when I thought, like when I was in high school, both my parents are in the medical field. My sister is also in the medical field too. She's a nurse. But there was this part of me that was like seeing medical field as just memorize a lot of stuff. And that didn't, I mean, the human body is like incredible and fascinating, and that's worth studying. But at the time, I just was not 100% convinced, because it just seemed it has a reputation of, like you said, lecture hall, blah 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 blah. Now read 1,000 pages. No, thank you. I'll pass on that. But there has to be a way to like make it fun, right? But also to be efficient in the way that you approach it, so that maybe some of that time can be used for more important things, like, you know, bedside manners of like really engaging on like a humanistic level, like maybe as part of the residency. Because again, when you're just reading 1,000 pages every week, your connection with others might be a little bit, lacking, like of like, how do I actually like use the social cues? Not all doctors are like that. but I'm just kind of going off of hearsay from what my mom has shared and her interactions with some doctors who shall not be named. I don't even know who they are personally, but there's always there's these different kind of like, friction points that I'm sure you're painfully aware of and that you're addressing through education. And I think that is magnificent. And Harvard is very lucky to have you in its, program to be able to like, dream up this new kind of like reality.
I really hope that we can make a difference because, we're starting to make some changes in our medical school. I can tell you that throughout medical school and throughout training, you see others, you see interactions that happen sometimes with others, and you see how it affects students, affects other staff, affects nurses, and so on. And the repercussions of that, some people quit medical school, some people quit nursing, or they just become bitter and so on. Or, in the past, doesn't happen nowadays, especially not at my institution, but in the past, you had this power gradient where the doctor would yell at the nurse and, like, but she's doing her job just like you are. And I think that's part of the change that needs to be incorporated into medical schools, into medical education. When I was in Kansas City, we did a lot of multidisciplinary work. It was called Team Steps, and I'm actually one of their proctors. And it involves having physicians, nurses, PAs, respiratory therapists, and so on change their position. So you do simulations, but you, the doctor, are no longer the doctor. You are the nurse or you're the PA. And you are placed in someone else's boots so that you see how they see it, and I think that is part of it's a very humbling experience. It's a very necessary experience, especially for people who just think too high of themselves. Just like you reached somewhere, others also reached somewhere. This is their dream. They reached it. So you can't put them down because they became a nurse, they became a PA. In my opinion, you should be grateful whatever you are. You reached that point, and so doing those multidisciplinary interactions is critical. A couple of weeks ago, we had something similar at my institution where we mixed physical therapy students with med students, and it was their first interaction. And we mixed three big groups together to try to see how the interactions were. And it was interesting watching the PA students just sit there and like, so for me, it was like I needed to make sure that they get engaged, that they feel like they're part of the group, and they don't feel like, okay, I'm with the med student, the med student's better. No, we're all part of this. You're all students. You're all learning together. I think it's critical for people to appreciate everybody else's roles. We all have a role. You might have been blessed to be a physician, a nurse, a teacher, an educator, and so on. Um, I think from that standpoint, I think we all should be grateful for what we've been slated for, in a sense, and hope for more. But respect everybody for what they do as well.
I agree. And I think that simulation that you just described is so amazing, not just for having them appreciate the roles of others and to have this sense of like humility, but the whole stepping into another person's shoes makes me think about empathy, right? And how important it is for us to really, yeah, just kind of like be mindful of what it takes to actually carry out that role and to build this respect that, in order for a patient to be, successfully discharged from the hospital, you need everyone's, buy-in and like effort.
I think a term that's been used recently, and that is emotional intelligence. I think emotional intelligence is very critical. And irrespective of your role, if you are not developed on that level, that's when the friction and that's when the negative interactions sometimes happen. And that's when sometimes people think too highly of themselves. I think it's critical to lean into the fact that we are all working together as a group and working for the sake of educating, improving, making people healthy, and so on, and supporting our community. At the end of the day, we're all doing this for our community. Education is for the betterment of the community. healthcare is for the betterment of the community. So I think leaning into working together as a team, as a group, and being focused and respectful and mindful of one another is critical. Yeah.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And like the scale, like impact that you have in your current capacity is really incredible, right? To really create this new model. And it's clear that you're engaging with not only other faculty, but those kind of in like the higher administration within the program, but then also the students, and you're able to really exhibit like what we're actually talking about. What does emotional intelligence look like on a day-to-day basis? Or when it talks about like, how do I engage another learner trying to apply from that finance course that we just finished in the spring semester and really, find ways to like, yeah, give praise to another student or to like deeply listen to what they're going through or to, partner with like another person in a collaborative way to engage them. And I think that there's these certain qualities that emerge about like open-mindedness that we've talked about, like the kind of collaborative spirit, the notion that everyone should be learning, engaged in inquiry, being humble, right? Knowing that it's not about titles. So, we're talking about this big community, these various networks that you are navigating in. But I also think it's important, again, that bridge going all the way back to your mother and your aunt at the dinner table or the dining room table of like what was going on there. Like I'm curious, like, I'm trying to make this like through line between like what qualities now when we think about global citizenship were like fostered at that dining room table and that you can connect back to this larger kind of arena that you're now serving, like the community that you're serving.
I'll actually I'm gonna go back to now and then go back to then in a sense.
Oh yeah, of
So,
course.
we
Wherever you
we
want to
we
start.
took the courses with Dr. Escalera and we took the course with Dr. McCarthy. Both of them taught us a lot about soft skills of engagement. Nowadays, these are people don't talk much about that, but soft skills, how you engage people, how you approach them, how you discuss things with them in a respectful manner, and so on. Those are things that were taught and promoted by my mom and by my aunt when I was that young learner listening to them, drooling over the stories that they're talking about what happened. This patient did this patient did that. Granted, in the past, the capacities of midwives were very different. They did so much more than nowadays. So back then, used to do so much. I would hear about all the stories, and you look up to that and so on. But it was how they engaged their patients, how they engaged the physicians they worked with, and so on. It was again those soft skills, those unspoken abilities, which we were re-educated about in our courses most recently. We did the speeches, and it was the verbiage that you use, how you bring attention, how you respect that person, drawing them in, and so on. Those are soft skills, which usually you're never taught. I've done other trainings and so on. Nobody ever gave us a course on speeches, on how to engage people, and a lot of the stuff that Dr. Escalera also in her course, although it was a very, very nice, welcoming environment. At the same time, there was a lot of information that was shared that teaches you how to engage and how to grow. So I look at what I'm learning now as reminders of what I should have focused on when I was a kid or younger person. Um, and for me, it was very critical to always respect the others, learn from the others, engage from the others, and accept what they say, but at the same time with a grain of salt and go look it up and like, okay, I'm learning from this, how I can grow, how I can incorporate this. One of the probably most important things that both, again, my aunt and my mom taught me was when I first started my residency, they were like, always treat the nursing staff well, always respect them. They will become your biggest ally and your biggest friend. And that was true. That is true. And it's the same thing, not just with the nursing staff. You see your environmental services staff, the housekeeping staff, they work really hard. People don't recognize them. Knowing their name and see when you see them in the hallway, just say, "Hey Joe, how are you doing?" Or whoever it is, just acknowledging them. To them, that means a lot. We have a lady who helps take care of the department over here. Her name is Sunny. I don't know who in my department knows her name, but saying that hello to her, I think is critical. Appreciating her for what she does. Yes, she might not be educating, she might not be engaging the med students, but she's making everything better for everybody around. So, I look at global citizenship as a concept that involves people of all ranks, all levels, all races, all genders. Um, it doesn't matter your age, it doesn't matter where you come from. We're all part of a big group working with each other to support each other and to make this a better place for everybody else. Um, that's how I see this. Again, I'm very grateful for what I've been offered. I hope that I can make a difference from that standpoint, um, whether it's on the education level or even within my department from that standpoint of how to make things better and how to treat people, appreciate people for what they are.
Wow, I love that. And I think what you're speaking to is being able and having that capacity to see and value the humanity in others, right? Something as simple as like saying, like remembering someone's name. That name encapsulates all that that person is, right? And all the experience, past experiences that you've had. I mean, to invoke that and to say, I see you. I mean, we don't realize how important that is. And it doesn't matter like the specific role that they're doing, as long as they're working to fulfill that and are understanding that it's in partnership with everyone else in the community to make a hospital thrive and be able to like carry out its functions. I think that's so important. So I feel like that articulation of global citizenship also really resonates with my own understanding and the way I see it. So, the question, and maybe this is an obvious question, but would you consider your mother and your aunt global citizens?
Absolutely. Absolutely. On many levels, yes, absolutely they are. And again, I appreciate the two of them for what they've done. They're not the only ones I appreciate, but they played a big role. There are lots of unspoken heroes in my life that I have never acknowledged, but deep down I do. Um, you know, like um, a global citizen who has participated in my life without knowing that possibly he did was my father. Yes, he passed away very young. I would not be here had it not been for him. I would not be doing all of this had it not been based on the everything I've been told about him, how good of a person he was, the impact he made, and me wanting to model my dad, without knowing what he really did. I mean, it's based on what I'm told. It's just yes, they're as I mentioned, my aunt traveled. She lived in the UK and she lived in Australia working as a midwife. My mom lived in Saudi Arabia and in other Arab countries where she worked as a midwife and as a nurse as well. They've traveled a lot. My family has traveled the world practically. They have actually. Um, and by the way, we love to travel. Uh, um, so yes, they definitely are global citizens because they all believe in serving the community and bettering the world as a globe, um, we're all part of a bigger thing that we sometimes don't realize.
Yeah, that's so true that like we oftentimes just kind of retreat into this comfortable space, this sense of like, this is what I know, this is the boundaries with which I want to live in. And anything outside of that is just different, right? There's nuance. I don't care. It's different. We should label it that way. But being able to actually like physically be in different bubbles, right? Be in different countries, experience culture, and especially with the examples of your mom and your aunt being able, and yourself too, right? Being having practiced medicine in different parts of the world and interact with students coming from different parts of the world, different professionals coming around the world. you realize that, it doesn't necessarily matter by the language that that person is speaking or how rich or how poor that person is, right? It's really like, how can I, in my capacity, like my expertise, give the best possible care and treatment to this individual who is suffering, right?
Totally.
And that's it, right? And so, and that linkage, I think, of like our shared humanity is so important and needs to be valued. And I think in certain professions, and again, right, the medical field, like medicine and then also education are just really clear examples of like that direct impact because you're seeking to have as large of impact as possible in a way to repay this debt of gratitude to these important figures in your life that perhaps you'll never be able to repay the debt because of that impact, right?
There's the movie Hidden Figures. I love that movie because it's those hidden figures that made a big difference. And who's the person at the end of the day who shined? It was Kevin Costner because it was, he was, but in reality, it was all those three ladies and their actual, the computers behind the scenes who did all of that. To me, the hidden figures are my mom, my aunt, my brother-in-law, and my whole family who was supporting me, and the cohort of people who like my chair and when I was in Ohio and Toledo, who helped me get to this position where I am. He trained me, he mentored me, and so on. Um, it's I think a lot of people, take um, I'll put it this way. I won't be here without had it not been for all those hidden figures behind the scenes who are helping me get there. So whether I say their name or not, I'm thankful for every single one of them, for the effect they've had on my life, for the impact they've had on my life, and hopefully for what else I can do as well.
Beautifully said. And I also think you kind of anticipated a question that I was going to ask. Actually, the last question, which was like a book or movie recommendation. You mentioned Hidden Figures. Do you want to just stand by that as your movie recommendation, or would you like to also include another kind of important thing
Okay,
that?
so I love movies with lots of songs in them. I'll tell you what my favorite movies are: Moulin Rouge and Greatest Showman, just because there's so many songs and I like. I know all the songs by heart. Those are like the ones which I like. If I'm driving down the highway, windows open, and you're singing, those are the ones I sing to. But as a movie that made a big impact on me behind the scenes without really, I think Hidden Figures played a big role for me. When you reflect on your life and reflect on everybody who came into your life and what they played as a role. Um, Again, as I mentioned, my father passed away when I was very young. So I grew up in a household where my brother-in-law was the father figure. My eldest sister was my sort of like my mother figure. My other two sisters were the same when I had to travel back and forth and so on. So again, I had a lot of hidden figures behind the scenes that helped me get to where I am. I can't name all of them, but there's been so many um, whom I'm so grateful for. And yes, Hidden Figures is my choice if I get to
Great
choose.
movie. It's a great movie. And it just so beautifully encapsulates our conversation. And yeah, all these really important, impactful, and special figures that have made you who you are today.
There's one more thing in that movie that I love.
Yeah.
I love when Kevin Costner goes to the bathroom and destroys the sign that says colored people only. To me, that is very important because that sign, to me, destroying that sign specifically, we need to get rid of those barriers, whether it's race, whether it's sexuality, whether it's poverty, get rid of the barriers. We're all human. Let's treat each other as human. So for me, to me, taking down that sign spoke a lot and meant a lot and had a big effect as well. Although, it's a bathroom sign, but to me, it meant a lot more. That's why in a lot of the research that I do, I focus a lot on barriers to care and how you can get rid of those barriers to care and how we can make it more a global citizenship.
you know, on that note, right, we're wrapping up, and it's been such a wonderful opportunity to learn more about your story, Dani, and you know, just like this conversation is brimming with appreciation and gratitude. So I'm just, you know, all warm and happy inside. So thank you so much for this.
Thank you. Really,
And
thank you for hosting me. I really
yeah,
appreciate it.
and I actually wanted to, you know, have the last word be given to you. Any final thoughts or anything to kind of just kind of sign off on this wonderful conversation that we've been having?
I would just say, let's think of our fellow colleagues and people we work with all the time. Let's think of how they've impacted our lives and be grateful for what they've done for us. It's not always about what am I getting from someone, but what can I say thank you for everything that they've done already for me. So thank you for doing this. And yeah, thanks again.